The cool evening breeze rustled through my garden as I arranged the plates on the outdoor table. I'd spent all day preparing for this family dinner, trimming the hedges, mowing the lawn, and setting up the string lights that now twinkled overhead like earthbound stars. My arthritic hands ached from the effort, but I wanted everything to be perfect. After 57 years of hard work, I'd learned that the details matter. My modest two-story home in Brookfield, Wisconsin, wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, paid for with decades of early mornings and late nights at the construction company I'd built from nothing. The backyard garden had been Martha's pride and joy before cancer took her 5 years ago. I kept it alive for her, learning through trial and error how to nurture each plant she'd loved. "Dad, we're here." My daughter Emma's voice called from the side gate. I straightened my button-down shirt and plastered on my best smile. "Around back, sweetheart," I called, wiping my hands on a kitchen towel. Emma appeared first, her blonde hair, so like her mother's, pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She was carrying a store-bought pie in a plastic container. Behind her came my son-in-law, Richard, in pressed khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my entire outfit. He was typing something on his phone, not bothering to look up. "Dad, the garden looks beautiful," Emma exclaimed, giving me a one-armed hug before setting the pie on the table. "Thanks, honey. Your mother would be proud." I turned to Richard. "Good to see you, Richard." He finally glanced up from his phone, his eyes sweeping over the modest spread I'd prepared: grilled chicken, roasted potatoes, and Martha's famous coleslaw recipe. His lips twitched into what might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. "Frank," he acknowledged with a nod. Not Dad or even Mr. Sullivan. Just Frank, like I was one of his golf buddies rather than the father of his wife. I didn't let it bother me. For Emma's sake, I'd endured 5 years of Richard's condescension. He was a financial advisor at some fancy firm in downtown Milwaukee, the kind of place where they charged you just for walking through the door. Emma had met him right after college when she'd gotten her first job as an administrative assistant. He'd swept her off her feet with expensive restaurants and weekend trips. By the time I met him, they were already engaged. "Where are the kids?" I asked, looking behind them for my grandchildren. "Soccer practice," Emma explained. "The sitter will bring them over in about an hour." "Perfect timing for dessert then," I said, pulling out Emma's chair. Richard sat without waiting for an invitation, immediately reaching for the bottle of wine I'd splurged on. He examined the label and gave a little snort that made my jaw clench. "So, Frank," Richard said as he poured himself a generous glass, "still puttering around with your little garden? Emma says you're fully retired now." "Yes, turned over the last of the company operations to my partner Joe back in January," I replied, serving Emma some chicken. "Thought it was about time to enjoy my golden years." Richard swirled his wine, looking at me over the rim of his glass. "Must be tough, living on just Social Security. Those benefits barely cover groceries these days." Emma shot him a look. "Richard, Dad's fine. It's okay, sweetheart," I interjected softly. "I manage just fine." The truth was, I did more than manage. But Richard didn't need to know that. He'd made assumptions about my finances from the day we met, seeing my calloused hands and modest home and deciding I was just another blue-collar worker who'd never learned to invest. It wasn't worth correcting him. "I'm just saying," Richard continued, cutting into his chicken with surgical precision, "it's important to plan ahead. So many people in your generation didn't understand the importance of proper financial management." I took a sip of water to wash down the retort rising in my throat. Martha would have kicked me under the table right about now, her silence signal for me to play nice. "Dad built his company from nothing," Emma reminded him, pride evident in her voice. "He's always been good with money." Richard gave that patronizing smile that made me want to flip the table. Of course. I'm sure Frank did his best with what he knew." The conversation drifted to other topics: Emma's job at the elementary school, Richard's recent promotion, the kids' activities. I mostly listened, nodding and smiling at appropriate intervals while my mind wandered. I thought about Martha, how she would have handled Richard with grace and wit. She'd always been the diplomatic one in our marriage. As I cleared the dinner plates and prepared to bring out coffee, I overheard Richard's phone conversation from the garden. He must have stepped away to take a call, not realizing how voices carried in the evening air. "Yeah, we're at Emma's dad's place." "No, just a quick obligation dinner. You know how it is with the in-laws." He laughed. "Especially when they're clueless about money. The old man probably has 2 nickels to rub together, but he's too proud to admit he needs help." My hands stilled on the coffee mugs. The dismissive tone, the casual cruelty of his words, it wasn't just rudeness. It was contempt. I set the coffee down and moved to the kitchen window, watching Richard pace on my patio, gesturing as he spoke. He was standing right next to the rose bushes I'd planted for Martha on our 30th anniversary. "Trust me, once the old man kicks it, we'll sell this place so fast. The land alone is worth something even if the house is dated." "No, Emma doesn't need to know the details yet." My heart wasn't pounding. I wasn't even angry, exactly. Instead, a cold clarity washed over me. I'd known Richard was arrogant, but I hadn't realized he was already planning to liquidate my home, Martha's home, the moment I was in the ground. I carried out the coffee tray as Richard ended his call, my face betraying nothing. Years of negotiating construction contracts had taught me how to keep my cards close. "Coffee's ready," I announced cheerfully. "And there's pie." Emma helped me serve, chatting about her plans to repaint their living room. Richard checked his watch repeatedly, making it clear this family dinner was an inconvenience in his important schedule. As I handed Richard his coffee, his phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and smirked. "More work?" Emma asked. "Jim's just confirming our tea time for Saturday," Richard replied. "We're playing with the senior partners." He turned to me with that smug smile. "That's how business gets done these days, Frank." "On the golf course, not with hammers and nails." I nodded, adding a spoonful of sugar to my coffee. "Times certainly change." Speaking of change, Richard continued, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. "Emma and I have been talking about investing in a lake house. A place up north where the kids can spend summers." Emma looked surprised. "Well, we've mentioned it as a someday thing." "No time like the present," Richard cut her off. "The market's prime for it now. We just need to move some funds around." He glanced at me, then back at Emma. "Maybe your dad could chip in a little as a gift to the grandkids. Something to leave as his legacy." The casual presumption, the calculated mention of my grandchildren, it was all I could do to keep my expression neutral. "I'm afraid my funds are rather tied up at the moment," I said mildly. Richard laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Come on, Frank. What could you possibly be investing in?" Before I could answer, the gate opened, and my grandchildren burst into the backyard, followed by their babysitter. The conversation was temporarily forgotten in the chaos of hugs and excited chatter about soccer goals and teammate drama. After dessert, as Emma helped the kids gather their things, Richard pulled me aside by the garden shed. "Look, Frank," he said, his voice low and confidential, "I know men of your generation have pride. But I'm family now, and I'm telling you, as someone who manages money for a living, you should consider downsizing. This house is too big for one person, and the maintenance will only get more expensive as you get older." I looked at him steadily. "I appreciate your concern, Richard." "It's not just concern," he pressed, glancing to make sure Emma couldn't hear. "It's reality." "You're what, 70 now?" 68, I corrected. "Right, and living on a fixed income. Medical costs will only increase. Be smart and sell while the market's good. Emma and I could help you find a nice senior apartment." I could smell the wine on his breath as he leaned in closer. Between us, he continued, you're not doing Emma any favors by hanging on to this place until you're forced to sell it for medical bills. Plan ahead, let her enjoy her inheritance while she's young enough to use it. I smiled thinly. I'll take that under advisement. Richard clapped my shoulder. That's all I ask. Just think about it. His expression changed as Emma approached, softening into something more socially acceptable. Great dinner, Frank. Always a pleasure. As they loaded into their SUV, Richard helping the kids buckle in with performative patience, I stood on my front step and waved goodbye. Emma blew me a kiss through the window. Richard gave me a nod, the kind you give to service staff after they've brought your check. I watched their taillights disappear down the street before I went back inside, locking the door behind me. In the quiet of my living room, surrounded by photos of Martha and the life we'd built, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had transpired. Richard didn't just look down on me. He was actively planning around my death, seeing me as an obstacle to resources he wanted to control. And he was pulling my daughter, my Emma, into his calculations. I sank into my recliner, the one Martha had always teased me about keeping despite its worn armrests. From this spot, I could see the backyard through the window, the string lights still twinkling in the darkness. What would you do, Martha? I whispered to the empty room. I could almost hear her pragmatic response, protect yourself, Frank. And protect Emma from herself if necessary. Decision made, I reached for the phone. It was time to call Joe. And after that, my lawyer. The next morning, I drove to the modest office building that housed Sullivan Construction. I'd started the company 35 years ago with nothing but a pickup truck and a toolbox. Now it occupied the entire second floor of a commercial building we'd renovated ourselves. The receptionist, Joe's daughter Melissa, looked up in surprise when I walked in. Mr. Sullivan. Dad didn't mention you were coming in today. It's a bit of an impromptu visit, I admitted. Is he in? In his office, I mean, your old office. Go on back. Joe DiMaggio, no relation to the baseball player, as he'd been telling people for 40 years, was hunched over blueprints when I knocked on the doorframe. He looked up, his weathered face breaking into a grin. Frank! Get in here, you old dog. He stood to shake my hand, pulling me into a half-hug. Joe and I had been friends since high school, working construction jobs together through our 20s before pooling our savings to start our own company. Retirement getting boring already? Not exactly, I said, settling into the chair across from him. Need your advice on something. Joe's expression turned serious. He closed the office door and returned to his seat. What's going on? I told him about Richard's phone call in my garden, his barely concealed plans for my property, his suggestion that I chip in for their lake house. Joe's face darkened as I spoke. That smug little bastard, he muttered when I finished. Always knew he was looking down his nose at us. It's not just that, I said. He's manipulating Emma. Making financial plans that involve my assets without even waiting for me to be gone. Joe leaned back in his chair. So what are you thinking? Cut him out of the will? I shook my head. That would only hurt Emma and the kids. No, I need to show him and Emma the truth. Which is? That her father isn't the financially illiterate old man Richard thinks I am. I leaned forward. Joe, I need to accelerate our retirement plan. Understanding dawned on Joe's face. You sure? We said we'd wait until next year's audit. I'm sure. It's time. Joe nodded slowly. All right then. I'll call the accountant. And the lawyer. Already spoke to Gerald this morning, I said. He's drawing up the papers. Moving fast, Joe observed. I thought of Richard standing in my garden, casually discussing selling my home while I was still living in it. Some situations call for decisive action. I spent the next 3 weeks putting everything in order. Gerald, my attorney for over 20 years, was thorough as always, asking the right questions and anticipating potential issues. The accountant, Mr. Patel, prepared the necessary financial documents, his usual precision a comfort during such a significant transition. During this time, Emma called twice to invite me to dinner at their house, but I begged off, claiming a minor cold I didn't want to risk spreading to the grandkids. In truth, I needed time to prepare without giving anything away. Richard would have immediately noticed any change in my demeanor around him. By the end of the month, everything was ready. I called Emma on a Wednesday evening, knowing Richard would be at his weekly poker game with colleagues. "Dad, are you feeling better?" Emma's voice was warm with genuine concern. "Much better, sweetheart. In fact, I was hoping you and the family could come for dinner this Saturday. There's something important I'd like to discuss with you all. Is everything okay?" Worry edged into her tone. "Everything's fine," I assured her. "Just some family business to sort out. Nothing to worry about." "We'll be there," she promised. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourselves," I said. "I'll take care of the rest." After hanging up, I sat at Martha's old writing desk, now covered with the documents Gerald had prepared. Each one represented a piece of the truth I'd kept hidden, not out of shame or secrecy, but out of a lifelong habit of privacy about financial matters. Martha and I had agreed long ago that we wouldn't burden our children with knowledge of our assets while they were young. We wanted them to develop their own work ethic, their own relationship with money. Even after Emma was grown, it hadn't seemed necessary to detail our finances to her. She knew we were comfortable, that the business had provided well for us, but she didn't know specifics. Perhaps that had been a mistake. In the absence of information, Richard had filled in the blanks with his own assumptions, painting me as a financially naive old man living on the edge of poverty. And Emma, not knowing any better, had allowed his narrative to stand. Saturday arrived clear and warm. Instead of hosting in the backyard, I set the dining room table with Martha's good china, the set we'd used only for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Fresh flowers from the garden filled her crystal vase at the center of the table. On the sideboard, a row of folders waited, each labeled in my careful handwriting. When the doorbell rang at precisely 6 o'clock, I straightened my tie, another departure from our usual casual dinners, and went to greet my family. Emma's eyes widened when she saw me. "Dad, you look so handsome. Is that a new shirt?" "Just dusted off my old Sunday best," I said, accepting her hug. The grandkids rushed past us, already heading for the backyard where I'd set up a new swing set last month, something I told them was a splurge from my fun money. Richard followed more slowly, taking in my attire and the formal table setting visible through the dining room doorway. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Special occasion, Frank?" he asked, handing me a bottle of wine, the same mid-range label I'd served at our last dinner. "Just some family business to discuss," I replied pleasantly. "Nothing to worry about." Dinner was a subdued affair. Emma attempted to maintain light conversation, asking about my garden and telling me about the children's school activities. Richard was unusually quiet, his eyes frequently darting to the folders on the sideboard. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the assumptions forming. Probably thinking I was going to ask for a loan, or perhaps financial advice for my meager retirement savings. After dessert, Martha's apple pie recipe that Emma had always loved, I asked the children if they wanted to watch a movie in the den. They agreed enthusiastically, and once they were settled with the latest animated feature, I returned to the dining room and closed the pocket doors. "So, Dad," Emma said, her voice slightly tense, "what's this family business you wanted to discuss?" I took my seat at the head of the table and folded my hands. "I've been doing some estate planning," I began. "At my age, it's important to have affairs in order." Richard leaned forward, a barely concealed gleam in his eye. "Very sensible, Frank. I've been suggesting this to many of my older clients." I nodded. "I've decided it's time to be completely transparent about my financial situation. There have been some misconceptions that I'd like to clear up." Emma looked confused. Misconceptions? Dad, what are you talking about? Instead of answering directly, I stood and retrieved the folders from the sideboard. I distributed them around the table, one to Emma, one to Richard, and kept one for myself. These contain full disclosure of my assets, investments, and the details of my estate plan, I explained. I think you'll find it informative. Richard opened his folder first, his expression eager. Then his eyes widened, and he began flipping through the pages with increasing agitation. Emma was reading more slowly, her brow furrowed in concentration. Dad, she said finally, looking up in bewilderment, this says you own the entire office complex where Sullivan Construction is located. And 3 other commercial properties downtown? That's correct, I confirmed. Joe and I bought our first commercial property 25 years ago. The rental income helped us expand the business during lean construction years. Richard was staring at a particular document, his face pale. This says you're the majority stakeholder in Lakefront Development Partners? I allowed myself a small smile. Yes. That's the holding company that owns the Riverside Plaza project. The new mixed-use development on the old brewery site. Richard's jaw actually dropped. That's a $100 million project. 120, actually, after the last round of financing, I corrected gently. Joe and I started small, but good investments compound over time. Emma was shaking her head, still processing. But Dad, you've always lived so modestly. Your mother and I didn't believe in flashy displays, I explained. We invested our profits back into the business and into real estate. We had everything we needed and saw no reason for extravagance. Richard had gone from pale to flushed. He loosened his collar, eyes darting between the documents and my face. Why didn't you ever say anything? Emma asked, her voice small. I reached across the table and took her hand. We wanted you to find your own way, sweetheart. To develop your own relationship with money and success. Maybe that was old-fashioned of us, but it seemed important at the time. Richard finally found his voice. Frank, I had no idea. All this time, I thought. You thought I was a financially illiterate old construction worker, I finished for him. Living on Social Security and the meager savings from a blue-collar career. Yes, I gathered that from our conversations. He had the grace to look ashamed, but I wasn't finished. You also thought, I continued, my voice hardening slightly, that upon my death, you'd be able to quickly sell this house, my home with Martha, for a quick profit. You discussed these plans quite openly in my garden 3 weeks ago, not realizing I could hear every word. Emma gasped, turning to Richard. You did what? Richard's face cycled through several expressions: shock, guilt, calculation, and finally, an attempt at damage control. Frank, you misunderstood. I was simply discussing prudent estate planning with a colleague. Planning that would benefit Emma and the children. Without consulting me, I cut in. Or, apparently, my daughter. Emma was staring at Richard with horror. You talked about selling Dad's house? Before she couldn't finish the sentence. Richard reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Emma, it was just talk. Exploring options. That's what financial advisors do. You're not his financial advisor, Emma said, her voice trembling. You're his son-in-law. And that house you were so eager to sell? It's where I grew up. Where all my memories of Mom are. I cleared my throat, drawing their attention back to the folders. If you'll turn to page 12, you'll find the current details of my estate plan. They both turned to the indicated page. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she read. Richard's face drained of color again. As you can see, I continued calmly, the house and a trust for the grandchildren's education are separate from the main estate. The business holdings, Sullivan Construction, and all related real estate investments are now organized under a family trust. Emma, you're the primary beneficiary, with the grandchildren as secondary beneficiaries. Emma looked up, confused. Primary beneficiary? But Dad, these documents say the trust is already active. That's correct, I nodded. The transfer of assets is already complete. As of last week, you are effectively the owner of Sullivan Construction and all its holdings. Richard's head snapped up. What? I've retained a modest income stream and living rights to this house for my lifetime, I explained. Joe will continue running the day-to-day operations of the construction company until his own retirement next year. After that, the board will appoint a new CEO, but ownership remains with the family trust. Emma was shaking her head in disbelief. Dad, this is too much. I don't know anything about running a construction company or managing real estate. You don't have to, I assured her. That's what the board and management team are for. Your role is oversight, not daily operations. I turned to Richard, whose expression had shifted from shock to intense calculation. I could practically see the dollar signs forming in his eyes as he reassessed my value and, by extension, Emma's. There is, however, one significant detail, I continued, drawing their attention to the final page in the folder. The trust includes a specific provision regarding financial control. Richard started reading quickly, his fingers gripping the paper so tightly it crinkled. His expression darkened as he reached the critical paragraph. All financial decisions regarding trust assets must be approved by both the primary beneficiary and the appointed trustee, he read aloud, his voice strained. The appointed trustee being Gerald Weinstein? He looked up. Your lawyer? Yes, I confirmed. Gerald has been my attorney and friend for over 20 years. He understands my intentions for the family wealth and will ensure those intentions are honored. The implication was clear, and from Richard's thunderous expression, he understood perfectly, he would have no direct access to or control over the trust assets. He could advise Emma, but he couldn't make unilateral decisions about selling properties or liquidating investments. Emma was still trying to process everything. Dad, why now? Why not tell me this when Mom died, or when you retired? I smiled gently at my daughter. Sometimes, Emma, you need to see people clearly before you can make the right decisions about the future. I wanted you to understand the full picture before inheritance became an issue. Richard was skimming through the documents again, no doubt looking for loopholes. These transfers, they're already complete? All signed and legal? Every last one, I confirmed. Gerald was very thorough. A tense silence fell over the dining room. Richard was the first to break it, his voice straining for its usual confident tone. Frank, I have to say, I'm impressed. This is much more sophisticated estate planning than I would have expected. You've clearly had good advisors. I've had experience, I corrected him. 50 years of building a business teaches you a few things about finance. Emma was watching her husband with new eyes, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Richard, did you really talk about selling Dad's house after he died? Without even mentioning it to me? Richard's smile was tight. It was a theoretical discussion, Emma. Just exploring options, like I said. While standing in his garden, Emma said flatly. During a family dinner. Before Richard could respond, the pocket doors slid open and my grandchildren bounded in, the movie apparently finished. Grandpa, can we have ice cream? Little Jacob asked, blissfully unaware of the tension in the room. I welcomed the interruption. Of course you can. I bought your favorite cookie dough. As I led the children to the kitchen, I heard Emma say in a low, controlled voice to Richard, we'll discuss this at home. In the kitchen, I scooped ice cream into bowls while my grandchildren chattered about the movie. Through the doorway, I could see Emma gathering the folders, her movements precise and controlled, a sign she was angry but holding it together for the children. Richard was on his phone, typing furiously, probably already contacting his own lawyer to verify what I told them. When they came to say goodbye, Emma hugged me tightly, whispering, "We need to talk more about this, Dad."
Soon. I nodded. Whenever you're ready, sweetheart.
Richard's handshake was firm, his smile professionally pleasant, but his eyes were cold with calculation.
Quite an evening, Frank.
Full of surprises.
Life often is, I replied evenly.
After they left, I sat in Martha's chair by the window, watching the last glow of sunset fade from the sky. I'd set things in motion now, revealed the truth and established protections for Emma and the grandchildren. Richard would be furious, of course, once he fully processed that he couldn't access or control the family wealth. But Emma would now see him clearly, and that was what mattered most.
Did I do the right thing, Martha? I whispered to the quiet room.
The grandfather clock in the hallway, another piece of our shared history, chimed 9 times. I imagined Martha's practical voice, "You protected our daughter, Frank.
The rest is up to her." I didn't hear from Emma for 3 days.
When she finally called, her voice was steady but subdued.
"Can I come over, Dad?" "Just me. I need to talk to you." An hour later, we sat in the living room, mugs of coffee growing cold on the side table.
Emma looked tired, dark circles under her eyes suggesting sleepless nights.
"Richard and I have been talking," she began, twisting her wedding ring. "Or rather, arguing. He's not happy about the trust arrangement." "I imagine not," I said gently. Emma met my eyes directly. "He wanted me to ask you to change it.
To make him co-trustee with Gerald."
"And what do you think about that?"
She looked down at her hands. 3 days ago, I might have agreed with him.
But now. She took a deep breath. "Dad, I found something on his laptop."
He left it open when he went to shower, and there was an email chain with his friend from the golf club, Jim Crawford.
My heart sank. "What kind of emails, Emma?"
"They've been discussing my inheritance potential for years," she said, her voice cracking slightly.
"Since before we were even married."
Jim introduced us at that company party because Richard was looking for, and I quote, "a simple girl with wealthy parents who wouldn't ask too many financial questions."
My hands tightened around my mug. "Emma, I'm so sorry." She shook her head. "Don't be. I'm the one who should apologize.
Richard's been condescending to you for years, and I never called him on it.
I just assumed he knew more about money than both of us."
"He played his part well," I said.
"Financial advisors are good at projecting authority." Emma's laugh was brittle.
"Well, it turns out he's not even that successful at his actual job. Most of his clients are family friends his father passed down to him. The fancy car, the country club membership, it's all financed on credit.
We're actually in debt, Dad. A lot of debt." This surprised me.
Richard had always portrayed himself as wildly successful.
"What are you going to do?"
I asked carefully, not wanting to overstep. Emma squared her shoulders, looking so much like Martha in that moment that my heart ached. "I've moved the kids and myself to Mom's sister's place for now. Aunt Susan has plenty of room, and she's thrilled to have us." She twisted her wedding ring again.
"I've also contacted a divorce attorney. Just for a consultation at this point."
I reached for her hand.
"Are you sure?" "Marriage is complicated, Emma.
Every relationship has rough patches. This isn't a rough patch, Dad.
This is a fundamental betrayal of trust."
Her voice strengthened. "Richard married me for money he thought I'd inherit.
He's been planning around your death for years.
And when he thought you didn't have much to leave, he was already planning to sell your home, my childhood home, without even discussing it with me." She squeezed my hand.
"The trust arrangement you set up? It was exactly the right move.
You saw him clearly long before I did."
Relief and sadness mingled in my chest.
I was glad Emma was seeing the truth, but hated that she was experiencing this pain.
"What can I do to help?" I asked. Nothing right now, she said. I need to figure this out myself. But knowing the trust is secure, that the kid's future is protected, it gives me breathing room to make decisions without financial pressure. She looked around the living room, at the photos of our family through the years. I can't believe you and Mom built all this without ever flaunting it. No fancy cars, no mansion, no showing off. I smiled. We had what mattered: security, a home we loved, work that satisfied us, and you. The rest was just numbers on paper. Emma stayed for dinner, and we talked more openly than we had in years. I told her stories about the early days of the business, about Martha's shrewd investment suggestions, about the risks we'd taken and the careful planning that had built our wealth. By the time she left, something had shifted between us: a new understanding, a deeper respect. Over the next few months, Emma's separation from Richard evolved into divorce proceedings. As I'd expected, Richard fought viciously for access to the family trust, claiming he'd made contributions to the marriage that entitled him to a portion of Emma's inheritance. His lawyers sent threatening letters to Gerald, demanding changes to the trust structure. Gerald, bless him, responded with polite, meticulously worded legal rebuttals that essentially translated to "not a chance." The trust had been established properly, with all the necessary legal protections. Richard's claims had no foundation. When legal intimidation failed, Richard tried manipulation. He showed up at Emma's workplace with flowers, pleading for reconciliation. He sent emotional emails about missing the children and wanting their family back together. He even attempted to contact me directly, leaving voicemails about how he'd misunderstood our financial discussions and had only ever wanted what was best for Emma. None of it worked. Emma had seen behind the mask, and there was no going back. 6 months after our revelation dinner, the divorce was finalized. Richard received a settlement that Emma's lawyer assured her was more than fair, given the circumstances, but far less than he'd hoped for. He moved to Chicago shortly afterward, taking a position with a new firm and largely disappearing from our lives except for his monthly child support payments, which were frequently late, and occasional weekend visits with the children. Emma and the kids moved into a comfortable home not far from mine, using funds from the trust for the down payment. She started taking business classes at the local community college, determined to understand the family holdings she now controlled. Twice a month, she met with Joe and the management team at Sullivan Construction, learning the fundamentals of the business her mother and I had built. One evening, almost a year after the dinner that had changed everything, Emma and the children came over for our now regular Sunday meal. As the kids played in the backyard, Emma and I sat on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Dad," she said, sipping her iced tea, "do you ever regret not telling me about the business sooner? About all the assets and investments?" I considered her question carefully. "Sometimes. Your mother and I wanted you to find your own path, but perhaps we were too secretive. If you'd known more, maybe Richard wouldn't have been able to." "No," Emma interrupted firmly. "Richard's choices were his own. I don't blame you for that." "Then I don't regret it," I said. "Everything happened as it needed to. You're stronger now. More confident. More like your mother." Emma smiled at that. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately. About what she would think of all this." "She'd be proud of you," I said without hesitation. "For facing the truth and making hard decisions." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching Jacob and Lily chase fireflies across the lawn. The garden Martha had loved was flourishing, tended now by both Emma and me. Next spring, we planned to add a gazebo, a project the grandchildren were already excited to help with. "You know," Emma said finally, "I used to think Richard was the smart one about money. That he understood things Dad could never grasp." I chuckled. "And now?" She smiled, a confident, knowing smile that warmed my heart. "Now I understand that real wealth isn't about showing off or controlling others. It's about security, independence, and creating something lasting." She looked at her children, then back to me.
It's about building something that matters and passing those values along, not just the assets.
Exactly what your mother would say, I nodded.
As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. Richard had looked at my calloused hands, my modest home, my simple clothes, and seen a poor old man, someone to be dismissed, manipulated, and ultimately exploited. He'd never bothered to look deeper, to see the legacy of hard work and careful planning that had built something truly valuable. His contempt at that garden dinner had been a gift, in its way. It had revealed his true character and forced me to take action before it was too late. Now Emma and the grandchildren were protected, the family business was secure, and we were closer than we'd been in years. Martha would be pleased. In the garden Martha and I had tended together for decades, surrounded by the family we'd created and the home we'd built, I felt a profound sense of peace. Richard had been wrong about me in every possible way, but I didn't need to gloat. The truth had been enough. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. Sometimes, it's simply revealing reality and letting that reality speak for itself. Richard had mocked me as just a poor old man at a garden dinner. Then I showed him exactly who I really was, and in doing so, showed my daughter who he really was, too. That knowledge was worth more than all the wealth I'd accumulated over my lifetime. It was the true inheritance I'd passed to Emma, the wisdom to see clearly and the strength to act on what she saw. As my grandchildren's laughter filled the twilight air, I silently thanked Richard for his arrogance, his dismissal, his contempt. Without intending to, he had helped secure our family's future in ways he would never understand. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.